Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us live today for this webinar. It is definitely a cold winter night here in Melbourne, Australia, so a very good evening to you if you're joining us from this region, but also good morning, afternoon, and wherever you may be. We have a great webinar for you today on a virtual simulation that is used globally to teach pharmacy students called My Dispense. And we have an amazing panel of experts whom I'll be introducing to you shortly. We'd also like to thank FIP for hosting this webinar for us, the 21st episode of the Responding to the Pandemic Together program. So my name is Vivian Mack, and I'm excited to be moderating this webinar today. So I'm the lecturer and simulation lead at the Faculty of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences at Monash University in Australia. I'm the academic lead for the virtual simulation, My Dispense, that we'll be presenting to you today. And my area of focus is also around the assessment of core pharmacy skills, mainly through simulation. So this presentation is part of FIP's special online program on COVID-19. And this particular webinar is specifically aimed at describing some of the innovations and approaches adopted across practice and education during COVID-19. So we're sharing our experiences around the use of My Dispense as a simulation. If you do have any ideas on webinar topics for FIP, please do get in contact with them at lena@fip.org. FIP also has a large range of resources during this current challenging times, and there is a comprehensive FIP webpage, which is the FIP COVID-19 Information Hub, and which is where all these recordings, including today's webinar and also previous webinars, can be found. If you haven't actually known about the FIP Facebook group called COVID-19 in Pharmacy, I urge you to check it out because it's a space for communication with all things related to pharmacy during these challenging times. So feel free to join the Facebook page and get to know others a lot more too. So please note that this event is being recorded and it's also live streamed on the FIP Facebook profile and will be made freely available. So to all those listening to us live right now, please feel free to ask questions by typing them into the Q&A box that you can see on your screens. And we have people aiming to answer those questions in the Q&A section. However, if time permits, we'll try and answer some of these questions live as well. We appreciate any feedback that you may have, so feel free to also share those with us by emailing webinars@fip.org. So in today's session, we'll be discussing how to introduce My Dispense as a simulation into the curriculum. We have, like I said, a wide range of experts who have been using My Dispense in teaching and learning, and they'll be sharing some of the case studies and also best practice on how they've been using it in the curriculum, but also during COVID-19 specifically. We will also share some challenges and a lot of the rewards that we've experienced using My Dispense as a teaching tool in general, but also during the pandemic. I'm going to introduce you to all our speakers today, and we have some expert panelists today with us. First off, we have Marion Costello, who is the General Manager for the Faculty of Pharmacy and Pharmaceutical Sciences at Monash University in Australia. We have Dr. Clark Kibido, who is from the University of Kentucky College of Pharmacy in the US. He is a clinical associate professor and has a lot of experience using My Dispense, specifically around his patient-centered care experiences courses at the University of Kentucky. And Dr. Kibido is also our My Dispense lead in the US. Next, we have two colleagues from the University of Connecticut School of Pharmacy in the US. First off, we have Dr. Lisa Holly. She is the Associate Clinical Professor at the University School of Pharmacy. She is also the lead for My Dispense at UConn and has coordinated courses around oncology, therapeutics, law and ethics as well. She'll be sharing with you how she's been using the simulation in the areas of therapeutics and also ethics and law. Next, we also have another colleague from UConn, Dr. Jill Fitzgerald. Dr. Jill Fitzgerald is a director for experiential learning and continuing professional development at UConn in the US. Especially as you know, during these challenging times, a lot of you may have challenges around experiential placements. So Dr. Fitzgerald is going to share with you about how she's been using simulation to enhance and for students to have that pharmacy practice experience during lockdowns and during restrictions. Next, we have Dr. Sarah Vordenberg. She's a clinical associate professor from the University of Michigan College of Pharmacy in the US. She has experience around using My Dispense in self-care courses, but also in hybrid activities around compounding, and you might be interested to hear from her as well. Last but not least, we have Ms. Puisan Saw. She is a lecturer at the School of Pharmacy at Monash University in Malaysia. She has a lot of experience in contextualizing the use of My Dispense into local contexts. So she'll be sharing with you how to include some cultural adaptations to local practice. So I've done all my introductions and introduce you to all our panel members. I would like to introduce Marian Costello, the faculty manager at Monash, and she'll start us off with our webinar today.
Hello everyone, it's my pleasure to be with you this evening. So I have the honour of introducing and welcoming you all to this webinar. So one of the things that, it's not the first point, but it's the one I want to emphasise the most because it might be a question right on top of the list for many of you joining us on this webinar. My Dispense is a resource that we developed at Monash University about 8 or 9 years ago now, and we developed it in response to a need that we had in our curriculum. And once we developed it, we thought, well, you know, it seems a waste for it just to be for us to use. So we explored this notion of sharing it with others. And right from the start, we were very keen to make My Dispense a free resource for others to use. And it's something that, you know, people have questioned us in the past and said, well, why don't you charge? You know, you could commercialize this. And we've said, well, we don't want to commercialize it. We want it to be a free resource. And for us, the rewards have far exceeded any sort of commercialization that we could ever achieve with My Dispense, because what we have built is a community of users all around the world, a global community of practice. And the goodwill and the exchange that we have with colleagues all around the world is what makes it worthwhile for us. So the point I really want to emphasize that My Dispense is free, and it always will be. It is not something that we charge anyone to use. What we ask people who use My Dispense is to give back to the community, to share what you do with others, and to become part of this global community of practice. So just a few little stats around My Dispense. We currently, as of today, have 133 schools of pharmacy around the world using My Dispense, and you can see the pie graph there showing the users from various countries all around the world, and you'll see all of that pink. The biggest user group is in the United States, and we have a very active team there of users, and Clark heads up that group, and they are a very strong community of practice in the US. Nearly 20,000 students enrolled globally using it. Students have logged in around 240,000 times, and we have over 800 cases or exercises that have been undertaken by students globally. So the growth of My Dispense has actually really taken off during this pandemic, because educators have been looking for online resources that they can utilise during this time. So we thought it was important to actually bring this webinar to you to let as many people know that My Dispense is a resource that you are very welcome to use, that you would join this community of practice, and that there would be others from countries all around the world that can help and support you in this process. We expect there will be potentially a lot of interest following this webinar, so we do ask you to please be patient, because we are a very small team at Monash that support My Dispense. We're a very committed team, but we will get to you, and we will answer all your questions and support you in setting up My Dispense and using My Dispense, but it might just take a little bit of time to do that. And you'll see listed here the central email support address. So if you would like to make contact with us following this webinar today, then please email us at this mydispense1@monash.edu address, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. Okay, this is my favourite slide because this is about collaboration, and we strongly believe that global collaboration and working together is what My Dispense is all about. And you'll see here photos. We've had 2 international My Dispense symposium at the Monash Centre in Prato, Italy. And you'll see the photo of us all in blue. We also had a Asia Pacific session in Malaysia, hosted at the Monash Malaysia campus. So we've had 3 international opportunities to work with our colleagues and to share My Dispense, and they have been magical events. So just before I finish, I would particularly like to thank the panellists taking part today. My colleagues, Keith and Viv, and my other panellist colleagues on this webinar, you could not ask for a better group of people to work with. They truly are generous and leaders in what they do, and such a pleasure to work with. And I thank them for all of the contributions that they have made. And now pass on to my next colleague.
Thanks, Marion. Similarly to you, I guess, looking at those photos, it does bring back a lot of memories. We should be in Prato, Italy this month, so it's a little bit of a shame due to the current situation, but also at the same time, really glad that we're able to connect virtually, regardless of whether we are able to travel or not. So I must say, with global collaboration, personally, with looking at those photos, I've collaborated with a lot of people that I've met through the My Dispense symposium and the My Dispense community, but I've collaborated with them on other areas of education as well. And I've made a lot of friends along the way, including those on the panel. So thanks, Marion, for kicking us off today in today's webinar. So just moving on to just giving a brief overview of My Dispense. So some of you who are actually on the call may already be using My Dispense as an advanced user. So you might have had My Dispense for a while, or maybe you've just obtained it recently. Some of you listening in may also be listening in for the first time, as you may be interested to know a little bit more about My Dispense. So we welcome you here as well. Due to the interest of time in today's webinar, we're not going to be going through some of the functionalities or technical issues around My Dispense, but more of an overview of the simulation of how you can use it within teaching and learning. So you can find a lot more of the other information from our website, and I'll give you the web link as well in a second. My Dispense allows pharmacy students to hone their professional abilities, not only during a global pandemic that we're currently in, but it's also to enhance learning experiences through simulation. And we want to ensure students are able to be fully prepared for work in a changing world. So My Dispense is a virtual pharmacy simulation for both community pharmacy, and also most recently we have a hospital pharmacy simulation within My Dispense as well. You can develop exercises where patients can present with a prescription or self-care requirements. You can also get students to be challenged with validation tasks, requiring them to check the work of a virtual colleague for accuracy, legality, and medicine safety. So all of our panel members today will share with you exactly how they've done some of these exercises. We do have region-based My Dispense. So we have the Australian version, US, UK, Hong Kong, Germany, New Zealand, Turkey, and Ireland. And if you're requesting for an instance, you will receive one that is closest to your practice in your country. We also have a panel member, Pui-san, who will share later on her experiences on how she's used an Australian version of My Dispense from a different region within her country's cultural context as well. So you must be wondering, how can you obtain My Dispense? My Dispense is provided to your institution, so it's not to individual faculty members. So you can request this on behalf of your university. Once you receive the instance, each institution, you will designate an administrator, and then you can enroll faculty members and students along the way. You can also link My Dispense to single sign-on with the university for creation of accounts as well. My Dispense is great because you can use it anywhere at any time, as long as you have a device and also internet access. Now, you don't need any plugins or you don't need any software download. So it's a very easy to use simulation. Of course, there's going to be challenges if you live in a country where internet access may not be viable, or maybe some students, due to equity issues, do not have internet. It's something to consider, but you definitely require internet access to use the simulation. So the simulation, it does simulate a dispensary. So you will see that there is a computing system on the screen. There is an inventory and also storage requirements. They are separated, so medicines are separated by schedules, and there is, you have your safe for controlled medicines. You also have a fridge, you have a shelf, you have the front of counter shop as well. So it kind of mimics a real community pharmacy. So it's quite easy to move medicines around. So in case scheduling differs between countries, you can easily switch them around. And you could also add more medicines into your inventory, and they're very, very easily done. Now, it's really important to remember that it is a simulation, meaning that it's not necessarily going to mimic practice to the T. So there's some things that you may experience in practice that it's not within the simulation. We have built the simulation for educational purposes. So a good example is that the simulation doesn't allow for shorthand. So if you were to put a shorthand for PRN for when necessary, it's not going to show up on the dispense screen. That's because we want the students to learn how to write a label, not necessarily just about abbreviations. So there's some things that may not mimic, like I said, real practice, but it serves the purpose to meet the learning objectives within your course. We also have a range of existing patient avatars that's readily available with various age groups and ethnicities as well. It doesn't stop there, as this is where the global collaboration can be extremely useful, because we have participants from and people who have used My Dispense around the globe. So it's quite easy to add patient avatars into My Dispense. We can provide you with very clear instructions on what to do, and you're able to do this on your own. You can add more patients that also suit your local context as well. And I guess the beauty with global collaboration such as this is that we're able to diversify our patient avatar population, especially during the current times. I think it's really important for us to include various cultural contexts within our simulation. So that's just a very brief overview of what the simulation offers. And I know a lot of you might have a lot of questions as we go along. But as I mentioned, that's the link on the screen to our website. A lot of the information in regards to features and functionalities can be found on our webpage. So let's hear from Dr. Clark Kibido. Clark, do you mind sharing with us how you've implemented My Dispense at the University of Kentucky?
Thanks, Viv. And I'd like to begin real quick by echoing Viv and Marion's comments. I think I speak on behalf of myself and all the panelists, where My Dispense has really provided an opportunity to collaborate and build professional relationships, but really even more than that, friendships with those not only as panelists on the call, but even some of the attendees that we're seeing here in the chat. So welcome, everyone. We first integrated My Dispense at the University of Kentucky in the fall of 2016 and have built it out over a new curriculum that we implemented from 2016 to 2020, and specifically focused on most of the My Dispense use in our curriculum called PACE. So we'll talk a little bit more about PACE on the next slide, but the acronym stands for Patient-Centered Care Experience. So ultimately what PACE is at the University of Kentucky is a combination of simulation, so what many of you might think of clinical laboratory work or times where students can practice the medication use process or dispensing. It also includes live experiential or experience out in the clinic, as well as service to the community. But My Dispense itself lives in this 6-semester course sequence, and you can see for each activity that students do in PACE, they have to come with information they prep and practice. MyDispense allows for repeating exercises. You're going to hear from a lot of panelists in a lot of different ways on how to use it today, but this provides both a chance to self-assess. We're going to talk a little bit about how we use peers to do that, ultimately for the student pharmacist to become a master at a certain topic. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about this peer part. So one of the unique features of PACE is that in a traditional laboratory section, you may have students early on in the curriculum. So you see the US acronyms we use there as professional year 1, 2, and 3. These are basically years of students as they matriculate across the curriculum. But one of the unique features of a individual PACE simulation section is that there's about 10 students from 3 levels of learners in a lab section. So typically you may have an introductory lab or students, but we put students who have different levels of experience. So what this means is they may be introduced to MyDispense in the first year, but they continue to increase in complexity. So you can see an example here of a prescription validation. So Viv referred to this earlier, but this is when a virtual colleague had already prepared a prescription at the final part of the dispensing process. The pharmacist is supposed to verify everything. And from there, we can use those peer links to not only introduce them, but then build on those concepts. And ultimately then we go to assessment. And assessment from there is how we do competency at the end of each semester. While, like Viv said, we could spend hours and hours talking about some of the intricacies of this, but just from an introductory perspective, note that MyDispense can both grade and assess individual exercises for students. So we use it at the end of each semester to measure competency, that mastery we talked about at the initial. And you can kind of see an example of how you can assign points. The big takeaway from assessment is it's very customizable. You can customize it to what your experience wants to be and what you hope to get out of each individual exercise. And with that, I'll toss it back to Viv to share with the other panelists.
Thanks, Clark. I've used MyDispense assessments as well within my course, and I echo what Clark said. A lot of things can be automatically marked, so it actually saves time as well in terms of marking. And I also find that students tend to learn a lot better when they learn from the mistakes through assessments as well. So thanks for sharing with that, Clark, as well. So Lisa, would you mind sharing with us how you've incorporated MyDispense as part of the pharmacist patient care process at UConn?
Yes, thanks, Viv. So we've used MyDispense in a variety of classroom settings to master the pharmacist patient care process. As you might imagine, since it's a community pharmacy-based simulation program, it fits best into those courses where we want to practice community pharmacy practice. And we use that in our labs to enhance our dispensing exercises and learning outcomes. But we've also used it in a variety of therapeutics and ethics and law, both required and elective courses. And we use it to introduce new concepts, to practice and refine the understanding and learning outcomes of concepts that have been introduced into the lectures. But it's also useful for helping to practice documentation as well. On the next slide, I'll give you some examples of how we have used it in therapeutics courses. This is an exercise that we developed in our pain management elective. And within this exercise, we can use it to master the pharmacist patient care process by information gathering. As you can see here with the left side of the screen, the pictorial shows you that you can fact find. You can ask the patient questions and learn about what is the topic that is being described. In this case, it was a daughter of a patient who was prescribed a fentanyl patch recently, but had previously been on morphine sulfate extended release tablets, and she was very drowsy. So the student had to figure out whether or not this was an overdose or whether this was an expected outcome and how they would handle the situation with this patient. This gives them an opportunity to ask the patient questions, to see what other prescriptions the patient was receiving, both by talking with the patient as well as looking at the dispensing history. They might want to do a drug interaction check. And so we often are asked whether MyDispense has drug interaction checking alerts embedded within its simulation program, and it does not. And the reason it does not is because we want the student to understand how to find that information. They may go to the resources aspect of MyDispense, and you can have links then to drug information resources like Lexicon or Micromedics. That is an opportunity, or they could go to an outside source. The patient, or the student, excuse me, also gets immediate feedback because you are able to give that information to the student, and that allows them to be able to understand those concepts You can allow them to document. You can even have subsequent exercises so that they can see how their plan was implemented and then assess that further on. On the next slide, I'll discuss how we have incorporated it in our law and ethics courses. There's a variety of exercises that are shown to you on this slide. Here on the left-hand side, the top left exercise is a prescription that is presented to the student. It is written by a dentist, and it is for a controlled substance, an opioid. And so the student has to understand, based upon the state and the country in which they practice, what the regulation and law is. Can a dentist be a prescriber for a controlled substance of this quantity, for example? On the bottom left is a scenario where the pharmacist is allowed to prescribe naloxone. In many states within the United States, that's allowed. And this allows a student to practice within that regulation or law and follow all the steps that are necessary to be within that regulation. In the middle column there for you on the top is a picture of a prescription that has an omission within it, and also errors can be embedded into prescriptions, and the student has to assess whether all of the components of a prescription are appropriate and whether or not they could dispense it based on how it's presented. In the middle bottom center there, you can see that gunpoint is an example of how we might have an ethics type situation where the student has to identify how they would handle this situation in real life. They can be prompted to document what their rationale is and the different scenarios in which they may consider that. And then on the on the right-hand side, this is both of these pictures are an example of a situation where a woman presents for a prescription for an emergency call-in for a controlled substance. And the student has to understand how they would handle that based, again, upon the regulations within their state or country. In this case, you are allowed in the United States and some states to call in a controlled substance. And so there's a voicemail activation opportunity in My Dispense. This is not real live discussion, but you can record a voicemail. And then the student would have to understand whether or not that's within the laws and regulations. So as you can see, there are a variety of different options available to introduce new concepts, to practice concepts, and to practice some of the skills that we have in the pharmacist patient care process. Thanks, Viv.
Thanks, Lisa. I've always seen that patient avatar, or the avatar with the lady with the gun, the robber. I've never really known how to use it, but thanks for sharing. So at least I'll know when to use a robber avatar in this instance. So I'm sure a lot of people are quite interested and have learned a lot about how you could use the simulation in various areas such as therapeutics and law and ethics. I think also to share with everyone that you can do whatever you like and use the simulation to enhance your teaching. So don't be limited by what My Dispense can do, but you can do a lot of variety of exercises in a hybrid sort of teaching way. So thanks, Lisa, for sharing those experiences with us. Now I'm going to move on to Dr. Fitzgerald. Jill is the Director for Experiential Placements, and as mentioned at the start, everyone is challenged by placements at the moment because students aren't able to go out to practice. And I'm sure Jill has a tough job at UConn to manage this. So Jill, would you like to share with us how you've incorporated simulation to assist with pharmacy practice experiences?
Yes, I certainly would, Vivian, and thank you very much. At UConn, we introduce and implement My Dispense exercises in the first year of pharmacy school, so the P1 year. In the fall and spring semesters, students are enrolled in our pharmacy skills series, very similar to what the expertise that Clark had described. During these courses, we begin teaching OTC concepts, and concurrently, they are taking a communications course, which is building the skills for assisting patients with self-care management. My Dispense exercises are employed to reinforce the skills of collecting data and making recommendations for OTC treatment of common conditions. In the spring semester, more OTC categories are added to their knowledge base and more exercises are employed. And finally, in the spring semester, students are introduced to the prescription processing through an assignment of 10 hours of My Dispense simulation activities. And we use 40 exercises in all, estimating that it takes the student approximately 15 minutes to complete each one of those exercises on average. Students evaluate prescriptions and fully fill and counsel patients on dispense medications using those 40 exercises. And note that ACPE, our accrediting body, allows up to 60 hours of simulation to count for our introductory pharmacy practice experiences. Throughout the curriculum, we use My Dispense for approximately 15 to 20 hours of simulation. On the next slide, I'm going to describe what we did during the COVID-19 pivot to remote API rotations. In that pivot, we found the need for 8 students to complete their required community API rotation in the month of April to satisfy graduation requirements. This posed a significant challenge because even though some community sites were allowing students on site, the school made the decision to have students complete their last block remotely. We felt it was necessary given the uncertainty of the pandemic, and we wanted to maintain equity for all of our students. We didn't want students to have to choose between the safety of themselves or their families and their graduation requirements. So students completed a survey of the ACPE outcomes for outpatient pharmacy experiences to direct their individual learning plan for the required rotation. The preceptor then reviewed the students' survey results and tailored their experience to meet their individual needs. As a result, we developed a faculty-led remote rotation that included things such as medication therapy management, or MTM encounters, so a comprehensive review of medication. Through a collaboration with a grant from one of our faculty, students interacted with patients virtually and completed those encounters. We also deployed the My Dispense law exercises to reinforce concepts that would have been reinforced on their API rotation if they were on site. Students were assigned drug information questions and led faculty facilitated topic discussions of pharmacy management in the community setting. Due to the quickness of the pivot from remote rotations, which was about 2 weeks, it was necessary for us to have these students repeat the exercises that they had completed in their P1 year to reinforce or remind them of the steps for verification of prescriptions and dispensing concepts. While this may not have been an optimal way of meeting objectives, it was a necessary addition to the rotation to assure that all students met the outcomes of this required community rotation.
Thanks, Jill. That's really great for sharing the experiences. I guess the main thing is if you're not going out on placements, at least we've got some sort of simulation of the current practice as well. So ideally, we will want, obviously, our students to be able to go out on placements to get that practical experience. But I think all of us academics are trying very hard, and it's a very difficult time, and I don't envy your job, Jill, with being the Director for Experiential Education. So thanks for sharing those experiences as well. So for those of you on the call, if you have any questions for some of our panel members, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A. I know some of them have been answering your questions along the way as well. So we're going to move on to skills-based activities where we have Dr. Vordenberg, who will share with you about how she's used it for hybrid compounding activities and also around self-care. So Sarah, would you mind sharing with us how you've done all of these?
Thank you, Viv. In 2014, I was looking for a way to better engage my first-year pharmacy students. I found that about 1/2 of students came into my course with significant experience working in a community pharmacy, whereas the others had not had that experience. And so there was a disparity in how they were perceiving the course, where some found it to be quite overwhelming and others found that it was not challenging enough. Thankfully, I found My Dispense, as it's a very flexible tool that has allowed me to customize the experience for students. Students are able to complete exercises that align with how much practice they believe they need based on their prior experiences and their comfort with the skills that they're learning in the course. I will, in one moment, quickly talk about a more recent activity that I've developed, which is a hybrid compounding activity, and then wrap up my section by talking about self-care encounters. So I want to be very clear and transparent that My Dispense does not allow students to practice the hands-on skill of extemporaneous compounding. However, what it has allowed me to do is decrease the amount of time that students need to physically be in class to compound medications. Prior to class, on the left-hand side, you can see in purple that students have access to the My Dispense cases, and they're able to review the product information, patient information, and complete calculations necessary to prepare the actual compound during the class session. After class, they're able to wrap up the activity either during the class session if they have time or at home. As we move to the next slide, I'll share with you that this year, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, my students will actually be doing compounding at home. So they'll be taking kits from the college and completing the physical compounding in their home setting and then returning the products. And so I just wanted to share that as an idea of how it might not be ideal, but given the constraints of the pandemic, that's one way we've approached compounding. On this slide in the upper left-hand corner, this is a prescription that the patient has brought into the pharmacy for a compounded hydrocortisone cream. I've embedded the instructions for how to prepare the cream, and you can see some information about that in the middle of the screen. And on the bottom, I've actually repurposed how I use the patient question field so that students can put in some information about how they've prepared the compound, and it's streamlined my grading. As we go to the next slide, as I wrap up, I wanted to talk about self-care encounters. I teach the entire self-care course, and so I've created self-care activities for each therapeutic topic that I teach. So for example, headaches or colds. I've found that My Dispense allows students to practice encounters around self-care much more than if they were only seeing the cases that I'm able to cover in class. I have students complete self-care encounters at home. Importantly, self-care encounters from my perspective are much more open-ended than the traditional dispensing or validation exercises. Therefore, it's important to give specific information to students about how to go about completing the activities. So I've included here information that I've told students to put into their patient counseling section. So that way they have guidance on how I will be grading the activity.
Thanks, Sarah. It's really interesting. I can see a couple of questions about, I think that everyone's interested on how you're actually going to get the students to do the compounding at home. So I guess if you're interested, please post those questions in the Q&A box, and then Sarah will try and respond to those by typing her answer in. I've also seen a question about how you can use My Dispense for OSCEs. Now, it's a very good question, and this is where you could do similar hybrid activities. So Sarah talked about doing hybrid for compounding, so printing labels, preparing prior to going to class to do the extemp products. Now, in terms of OSCEs, I've actually done this within my course for self-care encounters as well. So they've used My Dispense as a simulation to learn about products and also fact-finding, so pretty basic questions. But in terms of the oral communication, again, My Dispense is not built for oral communication. So we actually do a hybrid activity where students will communicate with each other in a role play using the exercises from My Dispense. Now, we used to do this on campus as a face-to-face activity, but because of COVID-19, we're doing our workshops activities online. So they're still going to be doing that role play practice to prepare for their primary care OSCE over Zoom. And they'll use My Dispense as a simulation to practice around the topic. So this is probably one of the examples I could share with you for whoever who asked that question as well. So we're going to move on to talk to and let Puisan talk to you a little bit about contextualization. So I've seen a couple of questions about how you could use it for your own practice using a different region of My Dispense. And Pui-san, could you share with us how you've done contextualization in this case?
Right. Thanks, Vivian. So in Monash, Malaysia, we currently utilize the Australian version of My Dispense. Now, students enjoy using this simulation to learn safe dispensing practices. However, there are instances where practices are different between the countries. The flexibility within the My Dispense is that you can adapt local context within the existing simulation. For example, schedules of medicines may differ. Some may be stored behind the dispensary, some may be over the counter. The simulation is made easy that you can move medicines around the inventory to suit your local legal requirements. Malaysia is also a multi-ethnic country, and we wanted to ensure that our students were able to use My Dispense simulating the local context. We wanted our students to experience various cases that involve local, traditional, and complementary medicine use, as this is commonly practiced in the Malaysian population. Therefore, we incorporated various exercises by adapting and including these medicines within the simulation, and students are able to learn about the various interactions that may occur in practice. My Dispense allows you to remove, add, or amend products within the simulation, and I found this useful by adding local products that are commonly used. Cases can be simple or complex as you want it to be. An example of how I've included some cultural influences is by including a dispensing exercise on insulin use during the fasting month of Ramadan to a Muslim patient. You can select appropriate patient avatars and amend questions to ask based on the case that you've built. And due to the COVID outbreak in Malaysia, all experiential placements are postponed, and currently the country is still experiencing lockdown restrictions. And as Jill mentioned previously, we also used the simulation for the very first time to create a virtual community pharmacy visit for the first-year students. So adapting the simulation to local context may seem difficult, but it's quite simple and can be done over a series of steps. First, think about what exercise you'd like to build that suits the local context. Next, you can select local products that are required for the exercise if it's not already available in the existing simulation. You don't really require a special photographer. All you really need is a phone device and snap the photos over a clear backdrop. You can also do this to create local patient avatars. And after processing the photos, they can be uploaded into the My Dispense inventory. So I found this daunting at first, but I have also learned that you can start small and have quick, easy wins, and working together with other institutions can definitely speed up this process, which is, I guess, the beauty of this My Dispense community. So that's me. Back to you, Vivian.
Thanks, Pui-san. I think it's really important that you've mentioned around that global collaboration. So a lot of things do seem quite daunting. I mean, for those who are listening in, you might be wondering how long, it takes to do some of these things. And I think Pui-san's kind of mentioned, rightly so, that if you have a group of people within your country who is willing to work together, you will probably be able to churn out and share exercises along the way. So thanks, Pui-san, for sharing what you've done in terms of contextualizing it to Malaysian practice. So moving on, I know there's a lot of questions about, I know I mentioned the hospital pharmacy simulation, and some of you have asked, will we get a demonstration of hospital pharmacy simulation? So here you are, is a screenshot of how the hospital pharmacy simulation looks like. So if you have the new version of My Dispense, this is what you'll receive as well. So this is the new simulation where you're also able to, in the community ones, you get patients coming into your pharmacy, which you can also get in the hospital pharmacy simulation. But with this new simulation, you can also incorporate and include other health professionals into your exercises. So in this example, you will see that there is a health professional in front of you who has a query. You will notice there is a mini folder underneath the text. That's where you can attach documents. So it looks like in this particular exercise, there are attachments there. You can attach anything you like, including pathology reports, medication charts, progress notes, and anything that's relevant to your exercise. So I know there was a question about the use of EHR Go. And for those who don't know much about EHR Go, it's one that's used mostly in the US, an electronic health record, patient health records. Now, we don't actually have that incorporated within My Dispense, but you can still achieve the similar learning objective if you want them to review different types of clinical notes by putting attachments. We are in the process of building something similar to electronic health records within My Dispense. So keep a lookout for that. We are always, like what Marion is saying, developing new things within the simulation, and your input of what is relevant is really important for us and how we develop this. So as I mentioned, in this latest version of My Dispense, you have the hospital, but you also have what we call scenarios. So all the panel members have talked about building exercises, and they're kind of standalone exercises. But with the new version, you can have scenarios where they allow you to combine many exercises in one. You can include a prescription, over-the-counter medicines, and even validation exercises in one single activity that the students undertake. You can build these scenarios in both community and also hospital pharmacy simulation. And this is an example that you see here of a hospital simulation scenario. So for example, you can start off with a health professional in front of you, and then allow to include interruptions, in this case, a phone call by another health professional with a query, or be approached again by multiple different health professionals with questions. If you were to do this in a community pharmacy setting, you can have different patients approaching you as well, and have them appear at different points in time. So I'm going to show you a really quick screen grab of how this looks like. So you start off with the main screen. This is where we have the health professional in front of you. You can ask some questions, do some fact finding, look at attachments that you've provided to the students, including pathology reports. And don't be too alarmed. This is actually a sped up process of this simulation. And then you can be interrupted like this with a phone call. The student can decide to do it now or do it later. If they do it later, you're going to be constantly being interrupted. In this case, another health professional approaches you, and then another one approaches you again. So you can choose, the student can choose to do it right now or to respond to it at a later time. Scenarios are also time dependent, which means that there is a fixed time for them to complete each scenario. So this will allow students the experience of working under pressure to develop time management and decision-making skills. So now you can see the screen captures ended now, but you can see at the top of the screen, there are 4 sort of mini bubbles. Those are the 4 exercises that's built into a scenario. Now, once a student completes an exercise, the bubble will disappear because they've completed that particular exercise. You will be able to set the sequencing of the task and how each task is triggered. So for example, you might say that the first exercise will be, the first trigger or interruption will occur after maybe 2 minutes, or you could set it that maybe the student's actually responding to by entering some questions or referring to the dispensing screen. That's when it triggers the next activity. So how quick or how complex you want it to be, it's up to you and how you want to develop your scenario. So this is something new that we've included in our new version. So I'm pretty excited to use it as well. It's fairly new, and hopefully you get to use this as part of teaching students about prioritization of activities as well. Now, a lot of times people tend to ask, how long does it take? And we talked a little bit about this before. How long does it take to learn about using this simulation, My Dispense? So maybe Jill, Dr. Fitzgerald, do you mind sharing with us some of your experiences about faculty training?
Sure, Viv. Faculty training is definitely something that we considered when we first adopted My Dispense. But we found that faculty training is actually a fairly intuitive and self-intuitive process that is supported by some detailed user guides that are provided by Monash. and with the support of other faculty who are using My Dispense in our curriculum. If you're new to My Dispense, there are also colleagues from all over the world, likely in your country as well, that are using it. And as Marian had said, the community is very supportive of the process of training, so reach out to other colleagues as well. At UConn, we've used last year students, or P4 students, who are on academia rotation. They use a template for developing exercises that then faculty then enter into My Dispense. It's nice to use these P4 students because they are familiar with what they did in the classroom. And they're also helpful to test out those exercises after you've entered them into My Dispense to sort of work out the bugs in the exercises that might not be as intuitive as you develop them. This quality assurance process helps prevent clarifying questions from students who are completing these exercises and often just makes a better product. Our experience is that if you support faculty through the development of one exercise, they can generally take it from there and develop their own.
So thanks, Jill. I think a lot of times people tend to get a bit worried how complex and how simple it is to build exercises. So it's nice to hear that, you kind of get the later year students to be involved. The building of the exercises can take quite long, but it's more around just like how you build case scenarios essentially for exam cases. It's the same amount of time, but the building within the simulation actually doesn't really take that much time once you get a hang of it. So it's more the conceptualization of the case scenarios that might take a little bit of time. So thanks, Jill, for sharing that as well. So maybe Clark, do you mind sharing with us as well how are your experiences with students learning the simulation?
Yeah, so I think a lot of the faculty on the webinar can relate that sometimes our students are even more intuitive with some of these technology tools than even we are. And I think as you've integrated it throughout your curriculum, potentially where you started, we've done some kind of initial qualitative research that, a strong orientation combined with early introduction seems to be one of the most effective ways to integrate My Dispense into a curriculum. The one thing I think it's important at this point is to recognize the hard work of Keith and Keenan and Marian and the whole team at Monash. That website that Viv posted earlier, they actually put all the student guides in Word format, which means you can actually edit them specific to your institution. So you can replace the link, you can take screenshots. So if you want to individualize those and then share them with their students, that's an excellent way to orient it. And I think Viv has a testimonial she'll share here.
Yes, I think it's really important, like what Jill was saying before, students will help you with your instructional material. A lot of times we find that what we think we've written is what students really want to see. But I've used students to help improve some of our instructions. So they will tell you they want screenshots, don't have to put certain things in. Use them as a means of helping out and getting feedback from them as well. So with this, one of our students at Monash University, she's a final year student. She actually did say that simulation itself, like My Dispense, doesn't replace clinical placement, but it does provide a good supplement to learning, given that, with the current pandemic, face-to-face is not possible. And she also felt that the simulation built her confidence in dispensing skills before graduation as a means of a safe environment to learn from. So when they make mistakes, they know that these mistakes don't have that harmful effect that you will get in practice if they did do it. So it's really important that students do understand that this is really a safe space for students to repeat exercises, to get immediate feedback and learn from them. So I've talked a little bit about the student experience and the student rewards, but maybe Sarah, do you want to share some of the rewards you've experienced from using My Dispense during this pandemic?
Absolutely. As I talked about earlier, I have found that My Dispense allows students to self-practice cases to a much greater extent than they would be able to do if we were limited to the exercises that can be completed during a traditional class time. Additionally, there are existing exercises that have been developed by faculty who've been involved with My Dispense, and that allows others to quickly get up and running with My Dispense. Certainly My Dispense is very flexible, and you can customize those exercises to meet the needs of your particular course and students, but it's really nice to know that you can start with something that already exists. And then finally, I think it's really easy to use and accessible. My students are able to quickly start to use My Dispense, and when I've started to share My Dispense with some of my colleagues, they have also been able to quickly adapt to using this technology.
Great, thanks for sharing, Sarah. Lisa, what about yourself? Do you have any sort of rewards you want to share?
Yes, I think, you know, we've all been faced with how we're going to handle our students and making sure that they achieve their learning objectives during COVID. And certainly we experienced that here in the US this last spring. And we're able to use, as Jill described, and particularly within our placements to satisfy those learning objectives, but also in some of our coursework as well. And as we prepare for our fall curriculum, it is something that we're trying to include as well, as we need these other online activities for our students. And I can't say enough of how much of a lifesaver. I know that Jill, as our experiential coordinator at UConn, and the faculty that had to quickly change our academic outcomes and experiences for our students, it really was a lifesaver for us and allowed all of our students for a timely graduation this last spring. And I'm sure it will do the same as we are now entering our new academic year as we face this pandemic continually.
Thanks, Lisa. There's definitely a lot of rewards using the simulation. It's helped a lot of us during this time. During the pandemic, I think all of us are really struggling as academics to be able to meet some of our learning outcomes when we don't see our students face to face. So I'm glad to hear that the simulation has definitely helped some of you during the pandemic, and I can see some of you have provided that testimonials in the chat as well. So we might have a couple of minutes maybe to go through a couple of the questions. I think there's still a lot of questions about how much it costs, if there is a cost to a less robust new version. We just want to reiterate that it is free. My Dispense is free. There is no cost associated with it. As what Marion was saying, what we ask of you is to give back to the others and to build a community. So if you would like to share your cases with your other peers who are also starting off using My Dispense, we urge you to do so. There are also other questions about whether you'll get some cases already built in. So you will get some cases that are already in there for you. However, you might want to check them and review them to see if it suits you for your sort of purpose in that instance. There's also other questions about whether or not there's an inpatient prescription verification. Clark, do you mind maybe just helping with answering that question? So there's a question about whether there is an inpatient prescription verification. I'm assuming it's to do with the hospital pharmacy simulation.
Yeah, so the inpatient thing that Viv kind of showed is kind of where that was where My Dispense was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, right? Where there's still need to build inventory and things. And I think that's a great opportunity for those interested and have expertise in that area to give back and help continue to develop that so it can have as robust features as the community side.
So Clark, while I have you on here as well, there's a question about maybe elaborating a little bit more about how you used My Dispense for assessment purposes.
Yeah, so Viv made a reference earlier to OSCEs. We use it as both a competency assessment at the end of our simulation, as well as timed assessment within an OSCE, so maybe a station or something like that. In general, each of the different types of exercises can be turned into an assessment. So while the first time you do it can be a little overwhelming because of the ability to customize, just like a case, once you work through it once, you get a really good feel for what you want to assess, how many points you want it worth, and can design all of your exercises individually. And I found that one institution or one country may look at something one way versus another, but the nice thing is once you've designed it, it should be ready to go.
Thanks, Clark. So in the interest of time, I know there's a lot of questions in the Q&A chat, and we've got Keith Sewell, who's actually our manager for My Dispense, who is actually answering some of your questions as we go along. So if we have not answered your questions live, you probably see some answers already in the text form in the Q&A section. So please do check that as well. Again, as soon as I've said that the simulation is free, people have asked again, is it really free? I think there's always the tendency of not being sure whether or not it's free. There must be a catch here. Like I said, there is no catch. We have developed that simulation here at Monash University. We found it really useful. So as Marion mentioned at the start of the presentation, we felt that it was important to share this with everyone else as well. Clark and Sarah, Jill, Puisan, and Lisa have all used it. They can probably agree with me. There is no catch, and we're not going to ask you to pay for it at some point in time. So it is free. Again, like I said, what we request is for you to share and build that community of practice. I know we weren't able to maybe answer all your questions. There are a lot of questions there. Please do email mydispense1@monash.edu. Again, like what Marion was saying at the start, we might get an influx of requests after this webinar, including if you would like us to have more webinars of this sort with a very specific purpose, please also let us know, and we'll try and arrange similar kinds of webinars for you as well. Do visit our website, as what Clark was mentioning. We have user guides, a lot of features that we've presented there. There was also a question about whether there are publications about the use. There's actually quite a lot of publications around the use of My Dispense that's done globally. There's also a lot of presentations, abstracts that we've put up on our website as well. We also have a Twitter account, so do follow us on our Twitter account to follow updates on My Dispense. So again, like I said, maybe we'll get all the panel members on again just to thank them for their time. I know some of them are pretty early in the morning and some of them are pretty late at night. And we would like to thank all of you for joining us from wherever you may be. And thank you for all the nice comments in the chat about how we've potentially helped you through this process as well. So thank you very much again from the bottom of our hearts for participating. Our panel members are coming back on now. So please provide your feedback through the 4-question survey that will appear to you at the end of the event. So thank you very much. Again, email us at mydispense1@monash.edu. And until next time, stay safe. Hopefully the simulation will bring some help to you during this challenging time with COVID-19. So thank you very much and bye.